Okay, good morning. We are in the middle of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, chapter Tuf Ayin Beis 272. We're holding halacha Chav Gimel, halacha number 23. We're in the middle of discussing the laws of drinking the 4 cups of wine on the Seder night. And we read so far that unlike any Kiddush throughout the year, where not everyone is obligated to drink of the wine, one can answer Amen and fulfill the obligation. When it comes to the Seder night, everyone is obligated to drink. And as such, even someone who doesn't enjoy wine and would therefore just say Amen to someone else's bracha on Kiddush, night of the Seder, push yourself and drink that wine, because that's the mitzvah. Even if you're following those who have the custom of not reading the Haggadah, and they just listen to the reader say the Haggadah, nonetheless, they should also be drinking wine. Because they're separate mitzvahs, really. The recitation of the words and the drinking. Ordinarily, the mitzvah is primarily the recitation. And the recitation can be fulfilled by listening. Shemeya ka'ona. A listener is as if they're reciting themselves. But a separate mitzvah from that is the consumption of the alcohol, the consumption of the wine. On a regular kiddush, the mitzvah is not the consumption. The mitzvah is the recitation. It just so happens that reciting while holding a cup gives it added prestige. And therefore, so long as someone is holding the cup of wine, I don't have to drink. I just say Amen. But on the Seder night, in addition to the recitation, which you can fulfill your obligation just by listening, the drinking itself is a mitzvah on each individual. That's what we learned so far. And earlier, we discussed the laws of reclining, but now we're focusing on the drinking wine. Now, another set of halachas that came up in the Gemara related to the drinking of wine is the obligation to include the children. Right? The way the Gemara phrased it, the Gemara said, everyone is obligated in the 4 cups of wine, including children, men, women, and children. To which the Gemara asked, what virtue is there for having children drink wine? Meaning, as Rashbam explains it, they're not obligated, they're minors. But nonetheless, because they were also part of the miracle, right? Women shouldn't be obligated because it's time-bound mitzvah. Yet they are, because they were part of the miracle. So are children. So from there, the Gemara says, well, okay, no cup of wine for them, but engage them in some other way. Give out nuts, whatever it is, to keep them present and engaged. That was the Gemara. So as a related halacha, this comes up as well as over here. Now, in halacha 1, in the first halacha of this chapter, the Alter Rebbe said that one should set the table early and start right away, not set the table after nightfall. And you start right away so that your children can be awake to engage in the Seder and ask the questions. Now, continuing from that, says the Alter Rebbe in Chav Gimel, if one cannot begin the Seder immediately at nightfall, as has been suggested in halacha 1, and the children now want to eat because they're hungry, and until they start eating, it's going to be late, right? In Montreal, it's a thing, right? Seder doesn't start till 8:30 at night. So even if you do start on time, but certainly if you can't because of whatever reason, by the time they get to eat, it's 10 o'clock at night, and they're hungry, and you want to keep them engaged. So it says, even though you may give them food to eat prior to Kiddush and prior to the Haggadah, which for an adult would be forbidden. The mission is bar as has been explained in chapter 269 and 271. Right? Where there it explains that although it is permitted to feed children non-kosher food, that's only if the food itself isn't kosher, not if it's an issue of time. Meaning to say, you could not feed a child milk and meat together. But you're allowed to feed children before Kiddush. Right. It's a prohibition to eat before Kiddush. Now, as a rule, you're not allowed to feed children non-kosher food, right? So maybe you can't feed the children before Kiddush, but it's non-kosher. So he cites to these sources chapter 279 and 271, where there he makes the point that the only prohibition against feeding children non-kosher is if the food itself isn't kosher, not if the time makes it not forbidden. So, for example, you can feed a child on Yom Kippur as long as the food's kosher, even though right now it's prohibited. Same thing with you can't feed a child milk and meat together, but you can feed a child meat and then right afterwards milk, because the food itself isn't kosher. Just by now, the time is not allowed to eat. As a child gets older and the child appreciates the value of time, you start to train children to wait before you feed them the next item. But a child is completely unaware of time, you can feed them meat and then 5 minutes later milk, as long as it's not doing them together. Because again, you're feeding kosher food, you're just not feeding them, you're feeding them at a time when it isn't kosher. So likewise here, you're allowed to feed children before the Haggadah and Kiddush, even though it's prohibited to eat at this time, because the food you're giving them is not prohibited food, right? So if you can't do the Seder right away, you're allowed to feed your children before the Seder starts, even though it's after nightfall, yeah? But nonetheless, and this is what we learned in our Gemara, once you be quick to remove the food from before them, and don't let them overeat too much. Because if you eat too much, you get tired. They shouldn't fall asleep during the recitation of the Haggadah. Now here is something interesting that we pointed out and we learned in Gemara. If you remember this, the Gemara said, right, what was the Gemara? Let's look at the language of the Gemara. I'm pulling it up on my screen. The language of the Gemara is, you grab the matzahs because of on the night of the Seder, the shvil tinuk is for the children, that they shouldn't fall asleep. We had a number of interpretations what that was. What does it mean, grab the matzahs? One was you lift it up to raise their curiosity, keep them engaged. Another one was you move it aside, right? So that they get curious. You're moving the plate away. We haven't eaten yet. Now, one interpretation was grab the matzahs away from them. They don't eat too much because they might get sleepy, right? Now, you remember we pointed out then that the language of the Gemara is not. Sometimes the Gemara, for example, when the Gemara says to give out nuts on Erev Pesach, it says make sure they don't give them nuts to keep them awake, so that they're awake to ask the questions. When it comes to grabbing the matzahs away from them, it says take the matzahs away from them so they don't sleep. It doesn't conclude the next part of the statement and then list asking the questions. It doesn't say that part of the statement. Now, we explained the reason perhaps for that is because it could be after the questions, but they're hungry now. Still, you're giving them food and taking it away because they don't eat too much, because you want them to be engaged for the rest of the Seder. Right? We pointed that out when we learned this, if you remember that. Yeah, remember we pointed this out? Where's that Ashbam? Where is it? Now, Ashbam actually says that they shouldn't miss the questions. But the Gemara doesn't make that statement. And here the Alter Rebbe says very similar. What did the Alter Rebbe say? Look at the language in this end of the paragraph there of 23. You should be quick to take the food away from them. Don't let them eat too much. They shouldn't sleep while reciting the Haggadah. It doesn't say they shouldn't sleep and miss out the questions. Right? In other words, it's not just a question of missing the question, but it's also a question of you want them to be engaged the whole Haggadah. In Halacha 1, where he said, make sure you set your table early so you can start right away. There too, he said, make sure the children shouldn't fall asleep. Because it says, you should tell it to your children. It's not just a question of the question, it's also a question of telling them the answers. Because to tell them so that they need to be awake. Not just for the questions, but for the Seder in general. Maybe just a little point of... Okay, parentheses. The Efsher, now it's possible, shematzas lechem oni, matzah, which is poor man's bread, that is to say, matzah made of purely flour and water, which is the kind of matzah you can use to fulfill your obligation to eat matzah that night. Right? As opposed to rich matzah, which would be matzah mixed with water and other juices, which we in Chabad wouldn't eat at all, but in theory is totally kosher for Pesach, but you cannot fulfill your obligation for the mitzvah of matzah with that matzah, right? So it's matzah, it's kosher for Passover matzah, but not kosher for the Seder night. Well, actually, it is kosher for the Seder night. It's just not kosher to fulfill the obligation to eat matzah that night. You have a mitzvah to eat matzah, It has to be poor man's bread. Okay, so it's possible, says the Alter Rebbe, that, sorry?
And that's the reason why that exists, as you were with one saying, is so that if it falls on a Friday and you need to eat, you're supposed to have you're not allowed to have matzah before Pesach, but you can't have bread also because.
Okay, we don't eat that bread. We don't eat that matzah either on our Pesach and Shabbos. Chabad doesn't eat it either.
But you said there's a specific time where it's useful. It's a specific situation where it's like where it falls.
For not for Chabad, for other people. Just for anybody who eats it. I think you're referring to Erev Pesach, where from the third hour you can't eat anything because you're not, because a third at the end of the day you're not allowed to eat because you need appetite.
Right.
Before the quarter of the day you're allowed to eat chametz.
Right.
In between you can eat rich man's matzah.
Right.
But that's for those. That's nothing to do with Friday. It's just in general.
Oh, okay.
And that's specifically for those who eat rich man's matzah.
Oh, okay.
But Chabad we don't eat it at all.
Okay. In many scenarios.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. At any rate, says Alter Rebbe Efsher, it's possible that matzah, which is qualified to fulfill the obligation of eating matzah that night, namely poor man's bread, it would be forbidden to give children. Even a little, before the eating of the Agada, for reasons explained in chapter 471, which we learned. And a footnote 93, he explains the rationale is that these children are obligated to participate in the Seder. One of the obligations of the Seder is to recite the Agada when matzah and maror are placed before you. And therefore, you can't ruin that by eating matzah earlier. Okay. So now, having introduced, so we have the halacha of drinking wine, 4 cups of wine, and we introduced the involvement of children, now, or involvement of family, and making sure the kids are engaged. So even if you're going to feed them before the Seder, make sure you don't overstuff them so that they're groggy and tired and fall asleep. Yeah. So from there comes the next halacha chavdalad. If the cup from which the one leading the Seder, the master of the house, the one who's leading the Seder, master of ceremonies, call that, who gadol is so big, and it contains in it multiple revius, which is not that big again, right? If let's say if a revius is, how much was it? 3 ounces. So you have a 15-ounce cup. Yeah, it's a lot of revius. So now, sorry?
That's a big cup.
15 ounces. How much is this?
8.
No, this is more than 8. Doesn't say. 9, 10.
Okay.
Right? At least. No? I don't know.
No question.
Yeah. My glass mug I fill it up with 10 ounces from the coffee machine, and it's still place for another 3-4 ounces in there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big mug, but still.
Right.
Okay, it's a couple of revius in. So let's say it's a 9 mil cup.
Yeah.
So it's 3 revius and then some. Yeah. So now I drink from my cup. So Yochel b'nei beis, badav b'nei beisai. So his children and family can lotis fulfill their obligation to drink the cups. Mashin nishtar because what's left over in his cup, mishdias balabayis, from the drinking of the guy who's making kiddush, the master of ceremonies. Vavad, so long as shagia rev revius lachalach, so long as at least every person can drink the majority of revius. This is a very interesting halacha. I'm assuming that this mitzvah, this halacha, is applied in times when there's lots of poverty and only 1 cup in the house. So what do you do? Right. So the kiddush is to be recited over a full cup. That's the proper honor to kiddush. Right. Or maybe there's a lot of cups, but not enough wine to go around to fill up everyone's cup. So if you have 3 people at your Seder and you have 3 10-ounce cups, but you don't have enough to fill up 10-ounce cups 4 times 3, but times 3, it's a lot of wine. You don't have that. So you fill up the 1 cup. So kiddush is recited over the 1 cup. The others answer amen. They don't have to recite kiddush, but they have to drink 4 cups. And then the balabayas can give to each of them a revius to drink from the wine over which the kiddush was made. And when the kiddush was recited, it was over a full cup. So it had all that honor. They heard it, they answered amen, and now they drink a revius. Right? I assume was an unfortunate reality for many Jews many times when they didn't live in the West, where we have a bunch of cups from IKEA for a couple of dollars.
Mm.
They didn't have that, right? Nonetheless, mitzvah and amufka, it's obviously the most prime and optimal manner of doing a mitzvah. To give each person their own full cup. The reason to have your own cup is, again, to have a full cup, which means, again, so this is why I'm giving the scenario. It could be you have 3 cups in the house, each of which contain 10 ounces. You don't have enough to fill up all their wine. So what's better? To give everybody around a revius in a cup that's 3/4 empty? Or better have kiddush recited on a full cup and then split it up? So we're learning here, the best is to have everybody have their own cup. But the only reason for everyone to have their own cup is if everyone has a full cup. Because when you recite the kiddush, you recite the Haggadah, you recite the benching, you recite the Hallel, which is your 4 cups of wine, you're doing it over a full cup. But if you're not getting that by everybody having their own wine in their own cups, then you've ruined it. So better have all the wine in 1 cup so it's full and then split up for drinking. Right? But obviously the best case would be everybody having a full cup. Their mitzvah, this is the best way of doing a mitzvah. Commission is Kupa Gimel, as explained chapter 183, which is the laws of Kiddush, where there it says having a full cup. Actually, not the laws of Kiddush, it's the laws of benching. We discussed the laws of Kosher Bracha, right? Because Kosher Bracha is also by benching. If you're holding a cup of benching, and there it describes how the best way to make a bracha over wine when you're doing it in connection with a mitzvah is that the cup be full and overflowing, as per the Chabad custom, or many others have that custom as well. Okay, so we're kind of still on this line of discussion regarding engaging children. So we talked about making sure they don't eat too much so they don't fall asleep. We talked about how you can share from your cup with others if that's the only way you can have a full cup at the recitation. And now we continue. Children too, their father is obligated to educate them in the performance of mitzvahs, and therefore to give them wine to drink. Right, this was the straight interpretation of the Gemara, right? The Gemara said that men, women, and children are obligated in mitzvahs in the 4 cups because even children were part of the nest. But the Gemara then interpreted by saying, well, it can't be, you have to give them 4, but it means give them nuts. But nonetheless, the mitzvah still remains to educate children to be engaged in all mitzvahs, including and especially the 4 cups of wine and the Seder, which is all about education. The whole thing is to engage children. And therefore, you should educate them to do so, ala Seder she'yizbar, following the order that will be explained in chapter 473 and 474, where we're going to describe the Seder night. And they should be trained to have the 4 cups of wine in order at Kiddush, at the Haggadah, at benching, and at Hallel. If they've come to the age suitable for education, which means you don't have an obligation to strap your 1-year-old to the Seder and start force feeding him grape juice. That might have the opposite effect of what you're trying to have, right? So if the child comes of age, then engage them at the Seder. So what does it mean that they come to the age of chinuch? Puts the Alter Rebbe in parentheses. The Hainu means to say, she'giu lezman, they've come to a time or an age, sheroy lachancham, that it's appropriate to educate them, l'shmoya hadvarim, to listen to the ideas or to the words, she'oimim alakoisis, that they're going to say at the cup, on the cup. So they understand what Kiddush is. We're sanctifying Shabbos. They understand what Haggadah is. We're telling them to say the story. It doesn't mean they know the translation of every word, but they understand the general concepts of what is being stated over the cups of wine. And it's about somewhere between 8 and 9 years old. Right? 4-year-old, 5-year-old is excited to be at the Seder for about the first 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Until after the recitation of the Manash Dana, because they memorized it in school. Mm-hmm. But there's no obligation to make your 4-year-old sit down for the rest of the Seder because you have to make them sure that they participate. That was the participation, let them go to sleep or let them go play Lego downstairs with their cousins. But
I don't think Chassidus, the obligation to keep on telling the kid the story of the Haggadah because they're the Neshama absorbs that, even though their brain.
Yeah, so certain parts you can bring them back, but you don't want to ruin the Seder by taking this obligation so seriously that you're forcing them. The point is, royalem, it's appropriate. So you have to know your child and know where they are and understand, are they appreciating the story that's being told here? Do you have a Haggadah that has pictures that engages them? Last year I bought my children a comic book Haggadah. they were busy, right?
Mhm.
So they're engaged, they know the story, where are we holding and which comic, so, but otherwise you're right. But they have to know what's going on. Otherwise you're forcing them and it's just backfiring. Right? So as he goes on to say, going for example, they understand something about sanctification of the day. Today's a special day, it's different than yesterday, so we're doing this kiddush to declare the specialty of the day. And therefore, because they appreciate what the sanctity of the day is, it would be appropriate to teach them to listen to the kiddush that you're reciting with the first cup. Ayin Siman Reis Machtasi, chapter 269. So that was with regard to kiddush, which is this first cup. And v'gam additionally, yesh b'em das lahavin, they have knowledge to understand mashem esapim lahem, that which we are relating to them, miyetzias Mitzrayim, from the story of the Exodus of Egypt, b'amiris Haggadah, when we recite the Haggadah. V'lochein, therefore, if they are, old enough and appreciative enough to understand the story, right? It would be appropriate to then educate them to listen to the Haggadah as we say it for a second cup. Same thing true with the benching. If they appreciate what it means, thank Hashem for food, which we recite in the third cup. The Gemara Hallel, the Hallel Haggadah, as well as the recitation of the Hallel and the Great Hallel being Hallel is a section from Tillim, right? The section right after that section is the 26 Kilam Chazdas. That's called Hallel Haggadah, the big Hallel, which we also recite. The Nishmas, which we also recite at the end of the Seder, of which we say the fourth cup. Yeah, it's there. Yeah, it's just a pro tip. This worked for, I suppose, from my grandfather to his son, my father, as it worked from my father to me, and I see it working from me to my children. If you, as a father, say the entire Haggadah out loud, and you're saying it and they're excited to sit there, your kids will want to sit around you and say it with you, because here's where the love and the action is. They want to be part of it. You're enjoying it. If you're getting annoyed at the setup and you're getting annoyed at this and I got so long, your kids are not hanging around. They're not, because it's annoying to dad. Why am I joining this? Right. So growing up, there was like an excitement and anticipation of the Seder. We're going to sit and we're going to sing the songs and who knows which song, and we're trying to find as many songs as we possibly can and saying every word. My father would chant every single word literally out loud, and we all sat around chanting with, because we wanted to be part of it. It was like
you don't want to miss out.
You don't want to miss out. It's part of it. It's exciting. It's happy. It's that feeling of sitting with your father who's chanting Haggadah out loud and you're chanting with him. It's a beautiful feeling. Whether I understood what was going on or not, to whatever degree I understood it, right? So that's just as a rule of thumb. This is true for Seder night, definitely. But it's true always, right? If building your sukkah is an annoyance, it's not going to help you. They're not going to help you. But if you're excited to build your sukkah, they want to be part of it, because who everybody wants to be part of the exciting action, right? It's just yeah.
Actually, you could say that could be the approach for all mitzvahs.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But a lot of times, as a father, you're so obsessed with wanting to have your son sit with you,
right,
that you end up like, sit.
Right.
It's like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Actually, ironically, get less obsessed with forcing your kid to sit there and get more obsessed with your own excitement in doing it.
Right.
And they'll gravitate.
What about like regular benching for
the same thing? Which means if they leave, don't say, "Hey, come back or sit." You just keep on saying it out loud with the same smile as like the kid shouldn't even know that you got annoyed that you left.
Right.
Because you're so excited about doing the Seder that you realize they left. And they'll come back. Not this year, they'll come back next year. But if when they leave the table, you start harassing them to sit down, next year they're not coming anywhere near you. Because they remember from last year it was traumatic. Right?
Yeah.
So it was benching on Friday night, just say the whole thing out loud, slowly. The kids hear it, they know you're doing it, they know you're doing it because you want it.
Yeah.
And then they come.
Yeah.
And so that's the rule. Okay, continuing. V'afaktanos. The same thing is true of young girls. Shegiu lechinuch, that come to the age of education. Dinim ketanim, they have the same thing as boys, young boys. As I said before, women are obligated in the mitzvah of the Seder night. 4 cups of wine and everything else, even though it's time bound, but we learned that women were part of the miracle, and therefore they too are obligated. So therefore, young girls are also obligated in the education of what's going to be when they're adults, which is what he continues to say. The same thing is true of all the other mitzvahs of tonight, not just the Seder, the 4 cups. There's no distinction between men and women. Even though as a rule, women are exempt from mitzvahs that are time bound, whether those mitzvahs are biblical in nature, from whether the mitzvahs are rabbinic in nature, and the night of the Seder has both. Matzah is biblical, Haggadah is biblical, 4 cups of wine are rabbinic. Yeah, once my friend of mine had this little discussion, counting how many mitzvahs we can come up with that you have to perform at the Seder night, and whether they're biblical or rabbinic. So, for example, benching is another biblical one. The halal, is that biblical, is it rabbinic? Right? 4 cups, kiddush, which is a mitzvah you do any Friday night. Right? What's a minhag? What's a rabbinic one? What's a biblical one, and so on. So, even though as a rule women are not obligated in time-bound mitzvahs, whether they're rabbinic or biblical, again, of which tonight at the Seder we have both, nonetheless. Our sages enacted that women should be obligated in all mitzvahs that we are obligated in this night, as explained in the Gemara, because they too were part of the miracle of the Exodus. Okay, now look at one in footnote 105. See? You see 105, footnote 105?
I see 106 and I see 104. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
For fee.
Yeah. So go to the actual footnote at the end of the booklet. The footnote printed in the back of the booklet there.
610.
Psachim 108b, the Gemara we learned. See also section 479.7, which mentions a practical dimension resulting from this obligation. Namely, the woman's obligation includes both the mitzvahs of scriptural and rabbinic origin, including the mitzvah of relating the story of the Exodus. As a result, they are also obligated to participate in the practices of the Seder, which include the dipping and everything else, because it's all connected to the retelling of the story. Now, in the Rebbe's Haggadah, in his notes to the phrase mitzvah leinu l'saper, the Haggadah at one point says it's an obligation upon us to retell. So the Rebbe gets into there. We want to discuss this here.
Was it l'saper?
To retell.
Oh, okay.
Sapel, like sipur.
Okay. Sipur, yeah.
Right? Mitzvah leinu l'saper. It's an obligation upon us to retell. We say this right at the beginning. Avodah Mayinu, we were slaves, we came out, and therefore it's a mitzvah upon us to retell. Even if we're all wise and we're all everything, right? That's the statement there. So the Rebbe comments on those words. It's a mitzvah upon us to retell, and discusses what exactly is the nature of this mitzvah, right? So he notes, says that the Rebbe notes this, that the Alter Rebbe's wording here implies that women's obligation to relate or to hear the story of the Exodus is rabbinic in origin, right? Because the statement was that the women are obligated in mitzvahs, whether they're biblical or rabbinic, and therefore they're also obligated in the retelling of the story, which sounds like it's a rabbinic mitzvah. And Rebbe discusses that over there, exactly what the nature of the mitzvah to retell the story is and why it's rabbinic for women. Okay, back to the main text, concluding halacha 25. Uvachilas matzah. When it comes to matzah, in chayavis ben HaTorah, they're actually obligated biblically, which is unique, because this idea that women are obligated in the mitzvahs of the Seder night is a rabbinic enactment, because they were part of the mitzvah, part of the miracle. Therefore, the sages said, you know what, they should celebrate also, which would seem to imply that even the mitzvahs that are biblical for men at the Seder night are rabbinic for women. Not when it comes to the matzah. When it comes to the matzah, they're obligated biblically too. Why? The mitzvah of eating matzah, which is a positive commandment, is linked to the negative commandment, don't eat chametz. And any time, as he's about to explain, you have a mitzvah that's, first of all, women are obligated in all prohibitions, right? Whether time-bound or not. Any thou shalt not, women are obligated. Okay. Now, whenever you have a thou shall, a positive, linked to a thou shalt not, then they're obligated in the thou shalt also. For example, the obligation to not work on Shabbos is a thou shalt not. Women are obligated. It's a loisase, right? Now, linked to the loisase, linked to the thou shalt not, is also thou shalt rest in the Shabbos. Thou shalt honor the Shabbos. So because they are obligated in thou shalt not, they're also obligated in thou shalt. right? The positive commandment.
The negative and positive is a positive.
Right. So if they're obligated in the negative, then any positive associated with that one gets linked into that obligation. And the same thing here, because the Torah said that the eating of matzah is linked to the not eating of chametz. Right? Shenemar, as the verse reads, "Lo yisarchel of chametz shivas yamim, toichel of matzahs." Do not eat on it 7 days of chametz. Eat on it matzahs. Linking the two. Don't eat chametz, but yes, eat matzahs. To teach you, in the same way, women are obligated or prohibited from eating chametz. As the verse reads, anyone who eats chametz is cut off. Kikol, that anyone, let Rabbi's nashim includes women. So too, they are obligated in the eating of matzah.
So why?
Yeah.
Why do we need this whole explanation of the positive and the negative linking? Because previously in 104, we just said they're obligated because they were part of the mitzvah.
That's a rabbinic enactment.
So we're talking.
Here he's saying it's biblical.
I see.
I thought you were going to ask something else, which is in footnote 108.
Oh.
Look at footnote 108. I just gave an explanation, which says that anytime there's a negative mitzvah linked to a positive, they are obligated. What did Alter Rebbe say? Why did Alter Rebbe say they're included in the prohibition of eating matzah? Look at the words. Well, what did he say?
Do not eat matzah.
Yeah.
Do not eat chametz.
Keep on going.
Let me look.
Yeah.
Because of it for 7 days.
That's the linking of the chametz to the matzah. Well, how did Alter Rebbe conclude that women are not obligated to? How did Alter Rebbe conclude that women are prohibited from eating matzah, from eating chametz? Yeah, see the English?
For anyone who partakes of leaven will be cut off.
Yeah, the word anyone
includes women.
Aren't they prohibited in any negative commandment? What do I need this for?
So too are they charged with the positive commandment.
Right, but okay, let's look at 108. Look at footnote 108. See section 271.5, which mentions women's obligation to observe positive mitzvahs of Shabbos based on similar association. That's what I was telling you before, right? If you're prohibited from working on Shabbos because it's a negative commandment, you're also obligated in the positive associations of Shabbos. Okay. Now, Marim MiTZVOS notes a slight difficulty with the wording chosen by the Alter Rebbe.
Who's that?
Marim MiTZVOS, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it's Rabbi Levi, who I mentioned last time from the library. I believe that's him. I think so.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Okay, so notes a slight difficulty with wording chosen by the Alter Rebbe. Although the Alter Rebbe is quoting the words in Psachim, the words chosen reflect a minority opinion. According to the majority of sages, the verse from Shemais, which is this verse which says, anyone who eats chametz is cut off, the words chosen from the verse from Shemais is unnecessary to teach that women are obligated in the observance of all negative commandments, even those that are time-oriented. That concept is derived from another verse. Right? Why does Alter Rebbe have to cite to a verse specific to not eating chametz to say that women are obligated? Anytime it's a negative commandment, they're obligated. So why does Alter Rebbe have to add that part? The conclusion is the same, right? When it came to Shabbos, right, they're obligated in the negative. Don't work on Shabbos. Why? Because the verse includes them? No, because anytime there's a negative commandment, they're obligated.
Right.
So why here does Alter Rebbe say why are they obligated in not eating chametz? Or why are they prohibited from eating chametz? Because the pasuk says kikol. The pasuk adds anyone. That's unnecessary. They're anyways obligated. Anyways, that's what I thought you were asking. It doesn't change the conclusion, but just a question on the language that Alter Rebbe chooses to employ and why Alter Rebbe uses this as a reason.
It's almost like the Rebbe wouldn't use this.
I don't know. I can't say.
Only because there's a hint to the negative.
In what way?
Being cut off. Is it even necessary?
Maybe. Okay, all to say that women and children are obligated each in their own way. Men are obligated in their own way. But everybody's got to be included in the Seder. And make sure you do it with joy and simcha. Okay, God willing, tomorrow, more halachas on the 4 cups of wine, and specifically what kind of wine. So best to get red, make sure it's not bitter, and so on and so forth. Have a wonderful day, Yidden.